And we got the first question. Hello, mod hosting limit supports Apache 2.4. Yes, of course, we support Apache 2.4 as well as all previous versions of Apache. Are you willing to assist us with configuring limits for a particular server? Yes, of course. If you want us to help you with setting up limits, contact our support staff and we would be happy to help. Are there a specific set of config for WordPress? Not really. We found that our default limits work well with WordPress, and what you should think of is, once again, is that a big account, small account, premium account, and increase limits just based on that. How to resolve error 508 fast? I mean, the fastest way to resolve it is to increase the amount of entry processes to for that particular user. You can do it through command line using LVE or through LVE manager in cPanel, DirectAdmin, and other control panels. As soon as you increase it, you get more connections in. The thing to realize is that the issue might not be the 508 error, might be a side effect, not the actual issue. So if you have too many connections, by default it's 20. So if you have 20 people, 20 requests connecting to some PHP URL at the same time, you will see this 508 error, which is a problem. And you might try to increase it to 40 and it might work. But what might be happening in the background is that this account is already throttled on CPU. So when you increase to 40 connections, those connections will start accumulating and you hit 40 and in a matter of seconds. And once again, you are seeing 508 error. So it wouldn't really help if the account is already throttled by CPU. And you can continue increasing number of connections, but all it means that those people trying to reach that site, they're still not seeing anything because the site is limited by CPU. Of course, you can adjust the CPU as well, and hoping that it would respond to those connections faster and the error will clear out by itself, and that might work as well. But as always, it's there for a reason. Like, you don't want to give too much CPU to a customer as it can affect other customers, and you cannot increase max entry processes indefinitely because at some point you will hit the max client limit in Apache, exhaust all the Apache slots, and as a result, Apache will just stop answering to everyone. So first, identify what is the issue. Is the account hitting CPU or IO or just entry processes? If it's hitting just entry processes, increase entry processes. If it's hitting CPU or IO limit, think about increasing those limits if you can afford it. If you think that it's a trouble for the server, then apologize to a customer and tell him that he needs to upgrade to a higher package, plan, server, VPS, etc. Okay, let me move on to the next question. Is there some possibility to ask to optimize the limits? Yeah, as I said before, you can check with our support and they will help you, but reality is that majority of people are good with default limits. Unless you have server being overloaded or unless there is something you don't like, there is not much we can do. There is no just generic optimization because as we were trying to explain here, the limits are actually optimized to be generic hosting account limit, like how much generic hosting account should have. And we spent some time to investigating where that number should fall, and we stand behind those numbers. But if you see that your server is not performing well, or some accounts are slow, we can go in, investigate, and provide you with the feedback and ideas on how you can improve those numbers. For 600 domain servers, there is some recommendation. So let me go back again to the same thing. It doesn't matter how many domains you have, because think about it. Do you have 600 domains on a single core server with 2 gigabytes of RAM, or a 64 core server with 128 gigabytes of RAM? It's a, does it really matter? Does the server matter? Of course it matters. But does the limit matter? No, it doesn't. So think about it this way. If you want each and every account to be your generic hosting account, leave default limits. If you want it to be a little bit less optimal. For example, you're selling dollar hosting, and you know that people don't care about the speed when they get $1 hosting. Give it a half, give it 3/4 of default limits. Don't go way too far because you ruin your own server. But you can limit the generic, you can minimize generic limits a little bit. You want to sell high-end performance hosting and you're charging $20-25 per it. Double or triple the generic limits. That's basically the idea. The actual number of accounts on a server doesn't make a difference. It's more like how many accounts depends on what kind of server you have. Not limits don't depend on the number of accounts per se. What about Nginx and cPanel? So Nginx doesn't need entry processes limits. It has very good ability to manage multiple connections by itself, so this limit is not applied, but all other limits when used with PHP, meaning PHP FPM, are still enabled and will work. So the follow-up on a question regarding how to ask our support, should it be done via tickets? Yes, all work with our support is done through our help desk system using tickets. Okay. Are any of those limits controllable in Plesk control panel? Yes, of course, all the limits should be manageable using LVE Manager in Plesk. Is Apache 4 from cPanel being beta at the moment? When do you think it's safe to go to the Easy Apache 4 for production servers? We're working very tight with cPanel on pushing Easy Apache 4 in production for CloudLinux with cPanel 58 release, I believe, that goes out pretty much in the next few weeks. So I think once they do Easy Apache 58, after that there is 3 months that it moves from their age to the current tier, and then you should be good to go with production. I mean, then it will be by default in production. How is bandwidth throttling controlled? So with bandwidth throttling, what's important to understand that what we're controlling is only outgoing limits. We cannot control incoming limits because the data already arrived. There is no point controlling it. But the way we do it, we basically tag each packet with a unique LVE ID, and then we use standard mechanism in Linux called TC, traffic control, to limit the outgoing bandwidth for packets marked with that ID. And the idea is that with the latest CloudLinux 6 kernel, you can already do it. You can use TC2 to control the outgoing bandwidth for each customer. Can we install CloudLinux after we have created packages and users in WHM? Yes, of course, you can install CloudLinux at any moment of time. You can install it on your existing servers full of clients, and actually majority of servers that we have had been installed on existing servers. How can I know that LVE is working on an account in my shared hosting server? I mean, one of the easiest ways to go to LVE Manager and go to LVE info and just search for that account. You'll see statistics for that account. If it shows all zeros, then it means it doesn't really work. It's not working. If you see some numbers, it means it does work. Could you expand on the risk of limiting CPU under 100%? When we're dealing with processes, each process can allocate the whole CPU, meaning that single thread will use a whole CPU at a time. And when we're saying that no, this thread can only use half a CPU, it means it will use that single core for half of the time. And what do I mean the time? So Linux is a multi-processing system, which means that you have a large number of tasks competing for the same CPUs. And the way Linux does it, it switches processes from being run on using some time slots. So you are given some particular time slots. Usually it's very small sub-second interval of time during which your process is utilizing that CPU. And after that, next process is utilizing that CPU, next one. But once you start to set limits less than one core, it means that this time slots will not be the full time slot, but portion of that time slot. And the smaller you do this time slot, the more time the process would have to be switched off and the other process will take its place. So what happens? In theory, like usually you're advised to have load average less than number of cores. Why? What does it really mean? It means that at the same time you have number of processes running that is smaller than number of cores you have on a server. And as a result, each process that needs to be run can utilize the core for the whole job that it has. Once you start to limit below that, this process no longer can do that. It will be kicked out even before its time slot is over, and you are getting a lot of time switches, process switches. So processes are switching more and more and more. And process switching is kind of expensive, so the lower you put the limit, so instead of saying, say for example, 1 core, you say 1/4 of a core. You're now doing 4 times the number of switches. And because they're expensive, you're actually putting more load on CPU, not less load of CPU. Another thing is that because it's 1/4 of the core, if you compare the running time of the process without limit versus this 1/4 of the core limit, your running time will be 4 times as long because you're giving only 1/4 of the time slot to the process, and it will also be, it's actually can be more than 4 times as slow because of the extra overhead due to time switching. I hope that was clear. It's actually a fairly complicated topic. Bogdan, do you want to take the next one?
Yes, thank you. How to save choose EP limit. Entry process limit, better to leave default at 20, but you have to use some LVE info command to check LVE stats, where you can see if entry processes, if there were some entry processes false. If so, and if you want your customer to give more power, you can increase EP.
Thank you, Bogdan. What I want to add again, so one of the primary reasons about entry processes limits is that they are used to protect against extortion of Apache slots and Max clients. So for example, if you're using Apache event, which has much better way to handle it, you might actually increase EP fairly safely to some larger number. But if you don't, you're better off definitely leaving it off. And to be honest, if you don't see your customers hitting this limit, don't increase it at all. Is it possible to configure any kind of burstable limits? No, we don't make it possible. We plan to make it possible in LV stats too, but with a huge disclaimer that use it at your own risk, and we highly don't recommend it. We strongly believe that it is wrong philosophy and it will create more issues for support than otherwise. The typical issue will be, why is my site slow today? It was fast yesterday, while there is the same traffic, and they'll show you that the traffic is the same, and they will complain about site being slow now. And you will have to explain to them that now there is no room to burst because whatever reasons, being your server is no longer capable to handle their bursts. And as a result, you will create an idea that your servers are overloaded. So we're strongly against it and not really sympathetic to the whole notion. We spoke with the Virtuoso team about it years ago, and they told us that one most crucial mistake that they think they did, and that ruined Virtuoso and OpenVZ name, is burstable limits and the fact that people weren't fully understanding what it really means. So we kind of staying away from it. Bogdan, do you want to take the next one?
Yes. How can we explain, show to a user why he is using all CPU RAM? As of now, until we didn't release it LV Stats 2, which we plan to do in 2 or 3 months, there is a way only to run LVPS minus P, where you can show all processes that are entered into LV. With LV Stats version 2, there will be a process snapshot. When a user hit limits, you will get a full stack of processes that actually hit the limit. Okay, next one for me. When an LVE setting is changed, is it changed instant? Yes, if you change LVE settings for a user, they are written into file etc container VE file, and they are instant. How do you know which file processors requests are guilty of using up limits for debugging? Just responded to questions above.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I hope that our snapshots will let you see what's going on, especially when something is limited much better. Does SEO work well with small servers such as 4 GB of RAM and 2 cores? Believe it or not, we've been in business for 6 years, and that was fairly typical server back then. So yes, it works perfectly. We still have quite a number of customers running exactly the specifications. What I found interesting is that the sweet spot, meaning majority of hosting customers, hosting companies, they still run 8 core 16 to 32 gigabytes RAM servers, and this didn't change for the past 2-3 years. I kind of think that the reason it is so is that as an industry we kind of settled on a number of customers per server, and you just don't need more powerful servers to do that, and instead people split much larger servers into VMs with such characteristics. Now I got very long question. I understand how to use limits to protect a server, but I'd like to be able to monetize resources. The problem with that model is that without burst capability, most limits are too restrictive to perform at lower reasonable levels. Providing burst with a clamping feature would allow me to sell resources. I know the next LVE has it, but I can't wait for years for it to come out of beta. Well, Kevin, I think you are mistaken. Sorry about that, but I really do. So you think that you will be able to allow bursting and clamping and it would work well. But if you think about it, you are still bound by this don't give more than one core to a customer. And I try to explain don't give less than one core to a customer. And I tried to explain it before, and well, to be honest, I simply don't have a good solution to that. We might somehow be able to restrict number of requests or some other way, but otherwise, as soon as you're starting to restrict customers to less than a core, you're wasting CPU cycles. And if you have full server of customers limited by a very small, tiny CPU segment, it will not work. It will really not work. And the hope that bursting will help, in my opinion, it's a wishful thinking. With my understanding of how processes would actually work, it's more of a wishful thinking. I understand what you want, but think about it. What happens when you cannot burst? And you will not be able to burst. And if you want to say that, hey, they can burst anyway, to like they're using, they will be able to burst it anyway most of the time or pretty much all the time. Well, then how is it different from giving your customers one core right away, right now? So instead of trying to think of a burstable approach, think of selling something like, and we've seen people doing it, selling still one core, but saying that customer cannot use more than 10% of the resources of that one core at any given period of time. So for example, for a day or within a month. And if they do, they need to upgrade. And you can do it today with LVE stats. You can get those customers who use more than that and upgrade them, force them to do whatever you want. And in my opinion, this is much better way to upsell resources without compromising the performance of your customer sites and without compromising your server performance overall. But it's a really good question, I have to admit. What limits do you suggest for cPanel server with 2 standard accounts, but it has 2 very intensive accounts? So that's a good question. So you have 100 standards account. Use default limits for all of them. But for those 2 accounts, increase the limits. Increase them to something like 2 cores or 4 cores. I really don't know the parameters of your servers, but depending on the intensity of those 2 accounts and how big your servers are, the sky is the limit. And you can create a different package in cPanel if you're using cPanel or in other control panel, and just have one package that uses default limits and another package that has high-end limits. And then anytime you switch those customers to high-end limits, to high-end package, they automatically get higher LVE limits. Or you can individually change the limits for just those two accounts. It should work perfectly as well. And we do see it commonly used. It's a good way to use CloudLinux, and we do foresee more and more people giving different limits to different accounts, different packages, and upselling very high, as much as 16 cores on a 32 core server, creating LVs with 16 cores for people who really needed, just charging them significantly more. Does CloudLinux has any particular option for mailers, so if an account is sent more mail like spam, it should automatically stop or suspend that account? No, we don't have it, because honestly speaking, we don't believe in this approach. There is many legitimate reasons to send large amounts of emails, like mailing lists, e-commerce sites, etc. And deciding who is spam or who is not just on a rate limit sounds bad to us. We just don't think it's the right place to decide. There is a lot of companies who do outgoing spam prevention, and we highly recommend using them instead. You just cannot do that with the right limit. Hello, Max, websites that can server handle with those limits, default limits. Um, that's a tough question. So the highest number of sites that we've seen with our limits, and it doesn't matter which limits you set, to be honest, is about 15,000. Majority of those sites were small sites that were rarely touched ever, so probably only 50% of the sites had one touch within a month. So it's hard to say what's the real limit. It depends on the server, it depends on how intensive your accounts are, but I usually prefer to decide when the server is getting to its critical mass and you shouldn't add any more customers is by CPU utilization. If you see that it's reaching to 60% most of the time, you're done. You shouldn't add any more accounts to your server. And that's actually one thing where CloudLinux improved things greatly, because before CloudLinux it was typically within 10%. Or maybe 30% of utilization when most people would stop. Once again, this 60% is also, it's very generic number. It's based, I would say, around 16 core servers. If you have more cores, you can go to higher. You can go to 70-80% utilization. Another parameter to look at is memory. If you see that you don't have a lot of memory used for caching, it means that all your memory is used for processes and you should stop as well. But most typically, as soon as you start to your cache becomes ineffective, your IO weight goes up, you have more disk operations that reflects in CPU as well, and it goes into the same 60% CPU utilization. We have so many questions. It's so great. I'm not sure we will be able to finish them all today, but I'll try. What settings are suggested for CMS for hosting like WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, especially for plugins which is used for backups? Oh, that's a good question. So for CMS, etc., use the same things as always. I mean, it's the same parameters. The only thing that I remember recommending higher limits is Magenta. It is a resource hog, so you might want to give it a little bit more. Now, regarding backups and why they're a problem. So the problem with backups is that they are really IO heavy, and they can drag your whole system down. So if you use something but default limits with plugins like backups, you do have a risk of dragging your system down, and while people doing backups, like someone doing backup and everyone else's websites are slow. And that's why we have those limits. So what happens when someone does a backup and there is a default limit? Their website will be slow. But why do you do it? So that others don't. Your choices: SSD disks where you can increase it, or try to increase I/O limits a little bit higher and see what happens with your disks. I mean, it really heavily depends on the number of sites and on how fast your disks are. If your disks are fast enough, increase I/O limits. If not, don't increase it, because everyone else will suffer. Test it, try it. It's very simple to change limits. The changes are instant. You can set up your own site, run the backup, see how it affects other clients, increase the limit, remove the limit, decide for yourself. Also remember, one of the good things about I/O limits is that CPU is throttling I/O as well. So quite often I/O limit is secondary and not really needed. Customer might hit a CPU limit first. The default limits has changed in the last time. I have different defaults. PMEM was gigabyte and virtual memory was 2 gigabytes. Yes, so we decided to go away with virtual memory altogether and decrease physical memory a bit. We no longer think that such high physical memory is needed. It was once again trial and error. We were looking at the hit rates for failures, like how often do people hit memory limits, and we were slowly working with several hosting providers with different limits, since their numbers lowered their limits, and today we believe lower physical memory limits are fine. Good day. I did try to use 256 PMEM as default. However, server load spike high. Can see a lot of users PHP processes from top output. What am I doing wrong? Increase to 348 megabytes P memory seems temporarily solved. Well, that's interesting feedback. Your mileage might vary. It's definitely trial and error. Everything you do with those limits depends on a bunch of other things. So, for example, if you use FastCGI, you might have to have higher memory limits, or you might have lower. You might be able to use lower memory limits. It's hard to say. It depends on the traffic. It depends on the amount of processes for an account that are simultaneously there. I can explain the spikes. So what happens is that if you have a lot of accounts hitting physical memory limits, what happens is that out of memory exception comes out. That's pretty nasty exception. It kills the process. But what happens next is a new process gets spawned right away, or pretty much right away. So especially if you're using something like FastCGI that automatically tracks the number of processes and tries to create new one. So if you set, for example, FastCGI to always keep the 8 PHP processes, but they don't fit into this 256 megabyte memory limit, as soon as you set this limit, you will have FastCGI constantly spawning the processes and limits constantly killing the process, or out of memory killer killing the processes, creating all those spikes you're talking about. But there is many reasons, many cases where this can come up. I'm not saying it's because of FastCGI. There might be some other scenarios that would produce the same thing, many processes being created, killed, and restarted. This limits how work with Node.js. So today they don't work with Node.js, well, or they do. It depends how Node.js started. So if you start Node.js through SSH or cron, your Node.js will be limited inside those limits as well. When we implement Node.js selector, it will be supported as well, but we don't have it yet. We have users using WordPress and commerce plugin. He always reporting slowness, even I/O is 1 megabyte and CPU is 50% use. Still slowness occurs. Any suggestions? Server configured with LVE, litespeed, and CloudLinux. Well, number one suggestion, see which limits are being hit. So go to resource usage for this customer, see if he's hitting any limits. If the user doesn't hit any limits, if he's not hitting CPU or I/O limits, he has a slow site. That's nothing to do about it. I mean, you can try to upcode caching, but as long as user is not hitting limits, which you can see from resource usage, it's not limits that throttling the site. And if it is limits that are throttling the site, see which limit and increase that limit, see if it helps. If already we have customers and packages installed, we can install CloudLinux, or we must install CloudLinux in fresh CentOS and WHMCS installation. You can install CloudLinux on existing servers with existing customers and existing packages. Majority of our customers installed CloudLinux that way. So it's a completely standard procedure. We don't move the customers, we don't change any customer data, we don't change their configuration, it will just work. How does Inode limits soft hard limit work? What happens when soft limit is hit? So this is standard quota limit in Linux. There is a soft one and hard one. Soft one is kind of a limit that is not enforced. A user might not even see it, but the system will start enforcing it after some time, I believe a week. A hard limit is something that user simply cannot go over. So with this quota, hard limit means that once customer hits it, he cannot add any more data to their account. With inodes, it means that customer cannot create any more inodes, like files, directories on a system anymore. Typically, you might want to set soft and hard limits to be the same, because there is no good way for end customer to see that they are hitting soft limit anyway. What is the future plan for CloudLinux and LVE? New features, big changes, very demanding features coming soon. So let me post you the link where we actually talked about it. So we had a blog post that goes over all the new features, well, all the major features that we're planning. And I'm sending the link to everyone so you can see it. Bogdan, do you mind taking the next two?
Yes. What happens if an account reaches PMEM limit? What happens with the site? When account is hitting physical memory limit, their processes are killed with OM killer, with the standard kernel process. They are written, that is written to warlog messages, and you can check that. The website will show 503 page when physical memory limit is hit. Just a comment, WordPress is a peak. Same, most terms are so bad that even a small site may require 2 or 3 gigahertz core to perform well. Yes, WordPress itself, clean WordPress is quite fast, but a lot of plugins and terms are really so bad designed and coded. They require much more resources. However, the main command here is to use some opcode cache and use some caching plugins like v3 total cache. I was playing with such plugin myself, and site speed could be increased even to 10 times compared to regular one.
Okay. What if a customer needs more power than 200% speed, and in the same time we want to use managed services because we don't want to worry with VPS or similar things? So this is something we do talk a lot, or at least try to talk a lot. There is no point to move customers to VPS simply because they need more. You might want to move them to a different cPanel server where you have only such customers, so that there is just like only 40 customers on the server instead of 400, and give them 4 cores or give them 16 cores. There is many strategies that you can use, and it's a huge benefit for a customer when they don't have to learn how to deal with VPS, they don't have to learn how to secure it, how to do updates, how to do backups. You don't have extra fees for a control panels that you have to include, or any other software that you have to include. So for customer, it's a very non-intrusive, just pay us a little bit more money or a lot more money. For you, it's extra revenue and less hassle and more margins. And what I've seen one of our customers do is they actually offer upgrades up to 16 cores. And the way they price it and they do upgrades, they offer their customer upgrades with comparisons that here's what they would get at VPS, here's what they would get with this 16 core package, which is also private environment, guaranteed limits, and stuff like that. But additionally, the way they show it that their pricing is 20% lower than similar pricing in DigitalOcean. And let's be honest, DigitalOcean is hard to beat. And that includes control panel, that includes management, that includes backup. DigitalOcean doesn't include any of that. So it's a huge benefit that you can do by upselling things like to your higher end customers instead of moving them directly to VPS. Will site work if CloudLinux is not renewed for a couple of hours? Yes, there is a 3-day grace period and everything should continue working. After that, CageFS and PHP selector might stop working. But to be honest, we don't stop the site working. We stop the ability for user or admin to change anything. We're really not into shutting down working sites. How can we reduce the number of zombie processes by using the CL limits? So zombie processes are processes that are killed, but their parent process hasn't collected information about them being killed. So most typically it's a bug in a process that's software that starts those zombie processes. I would try to find out why you're getting zombie processes. There is no real way you can limit the number of zombie processes with CloudLinux limits. Once again, so the last time I've seen a lot of zombie processes was related to mod fastCGI, and I would recommend just switching to moodle API to resolve that. Do requests block through htaccess rules or directories permissions count as AP? What about 404 requests? So most likely it depends. By default, we only count dynamic requests. So once the handler is something like CGI or PHP, that's when we start counting. We typically don't count those things for static files. We don't count it for errors. We don't count it for things that go through htaccess unless after htaccess is processed, it decides it's a PHP that has to serve it. But this is adjustable using mod hosting limits configuration. You can set which types to handle, including you can put the wildcard star, which means handle everything. And in that case, yes, it will handle for 404 htaccess everything. And we have people using it. The idea why you might not want to handle all the requests is because the overhead of handling static requests is about 10-20%. It's negligible for PHP, like you really cannot, it's sub percent, but for static requests it's about 10%, and you might not want to do that. Okay. Servers with 16 core AVS 32 gigabyte RAM with 100 accounts. I presume it's a question, what should be the limits? Once again, it depends on how active those accounts are, how fast you want them to be. I would say you can still run with the default limits. If you don't plan to grow beyond 100 accounts, check how loaded your server is. If you see utilization below 40%, double CPU limits. If you see memory utilization excluding caches to being half, increase pmemory limits. But honestly speaking, you can fairly safely increase pmemory at any time because it's rarely hits. What you usually hit is CPU limit. That's the number one limit that people hit. And EP limit as well, just because it gets hit right after CPU limit. Any recommendations for Moodle accounts? Honestly speaking, I don't know what it is, so no recommendation, but I will look it up what it is in the future. Just in case, so all the questions come in order they were posted, so we don't really see your previous question. If you want to add something to a question, retype the whole question, otherwise it's really hard to get what it was about. Also, do requests blocked by mod security count as AP? The same as I explained before, it depends, but yes. So yes, the way mod security works, it works when handler already defined, but I actually don't remember what happens first, mod hosting limits or mod security. I believe mod security comes in first, so it should deny the request even before mod hosting limit starts. Can I set every CloudLinux limit from WHMCS? Not yet. We're working on it with did few iterations, they didn't really work as we expected. We're still improving that part, and at some point we want to let you set all the limits from WHMCS, and we want your customers to be able to buy more resources for each limit that we have. So for example, they can buy more CPU or more IO, of course, with you making it enabled. Is litespeed is the same as Nginx? As in, isn't it affected by engine entry process limits? Oh, this is also a tough question. I believe it is. I believe it is as good, but they still use entry processes to limit number of PHP processes that they start. On the other hand, they have their own limit for PHP processes that they start. And Nginx, because it uses PHP FPM, has PHP FPM's limit on number of processes. So yes, those technologies have some kind of similar limits that protect against that particular type of resource drains and attacks. How is the bandwidth throttling controlled? I believe I covered it. It's controlled using a traffic control TC tool in Linux. Is it possible manage or control server bandwidth using CloudLinux environment? Yes. While it is available in production kernel, we still consider it's a beta feature. The control is done using TC tool. It's not, you should monitor it using TC tool. It's not shown yet in the LV stats, so we're for now just testing it with a bunch of hosters. We want to understand how well it's working, and then we will tie it into the infrastructure, in the whole infrastructure. But if you have this problem today with the bandwidth where you want to control outgoing bandwidth, and from what I know, it's a problem mostly for South Asia and Africa where bandwidth is at premium, contact our support. We will work with you. We will try to help you set it up. Again, question, does CloudLinux has any option to control outgoing mail like spam or PHP mailer? And is there automatic option to suspend the infected account? No, and as I explained before, it's like we think it's the wrong place to do it because there is it's impossible to decide who is spam or who is not just based on rate limits or which process is running. You can have completely legitimate processes sending a lot of mail or PHP process sending email. So there is a question, advanced options of CloudLinux in the future version. I'm sorry, I really don't know what it refers to. It's been 40 minutes since it was asked, so I'm a little bit past. If you can repeat the question, but the full question, I'll try to answer it. What cPanel option should be turned off if we're using CloudLinux? Fork bomb protection, modulo ID2 should not be used, jail shell should not be used. Pretty much everything else is fine. Okay, Rafael says, hello Igor, congratulations. The CloudLinux is the better. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. By leaving default limits PMEM, that would be 1 GB. Some shared hosting providers, including us, offer the minimum hosting plans with only 200 MB PMEM. Based on the nature of open source scripts these days, would you recommend having such low limits? Yes, we've seen this limit working just fine with quite a few scripts. It's not a problem. We don't perceive it as a problem. So you should do that. You should continue doing that. I mean, monitor if you get a lot of faults, you might rethink it, but otherwise, I think it's completely fine. I don't think quarter of a core limit is fine. I definitely don't think 1/8 of the core limit is fine, but 1/2 of a core and 256 MB PMEM as a limit to upsell to higher plans is a fairly good strategy for low-end packages. I use Plesk 12 with CloudLinux OS. All accounts have default limits. Since a few weeks ago, Apache server is going slow and sometimes it goes down and we need to be restarted. I checked resource usages, global CPU and RAM, and all the time it's below 50. Does Apache need customization in order to work with CloudLinux limits? No, Apache doesn't need customization. The question is what really happens. And it's hard to say just from what you're saying. There is a bunch of things that might be going on. For example, we've seen mod QoS causing issues like what you're describing, or we've seen some htaccess files having redirect loop that causing things like that. And we know how to detect it. If you have issue like that, contact our support. We have free support. Contact our support. Our support will try to debug the issue and come up with a solution for you. And this is one of the things we're for. If there is something that doesn't work as expected, contact us. In case of shared hosting and user exceeding I/O memory, physical memory, virtual memory default values, what is the recommended method to minimize it? Well, so let's imagine we don't want to increase the limits. What's the next step? I mean, the easiest thing, first thing to say, to try is to, if you, for example, using SU PHP, switch to Model-S API. That will right away drive the load lower. Second thing is make sure you have op caching enabled. If that still doesn't help, add another layer of caching like Nginx reverse proxy or Varnish that can simply reduce the amount of dynamic scripts that will be running. While the first two should have no side effect at all and should be as simple as it gets, the Varnish and Nginx is actually can create issues, so be very careful and use it as last resort. Does it matter which database management system to use, MySQL, Maria, or Percona, if using MySQL Governor? So yes, it does. We don't support Percona at all. We might support them in the future, but so far we haven't. We do support pretty much all the versions of MySQL and MariaDB, so between those two, it really doesn't matter. Are you saying we should never set CPU limits or to anything other than 100% increments? No. So you're fine to do, for example, 150% because you're still giving one core when it's needed, and anything above that is still fine. 50% is also fine, but once you're starting to get into 0.25%, you have to understand that each request will take 4 times or more as long as it would without the limit. And if you put it to 1/10 of a core, it will be 10 times more than the limit. And as a result, it will really suck. No, probably not the right terms, but yes. Okay, another question on Lightspeed. I believe it's the same question. How many websites are the industry sweet spot server that has 8 cores and 1632 gigabytes of RAM? Anywhere from 5 to 800 websites. In LV stats 2, will the snapshots show user bin PHP or PHP files that each process is using? I don't remember. I will check. But from what I do remember, that it really depends on how you run it. So, for example, with Model-S API, it will be one way. With ModSU PHP, it will be the other way. But one of the interesting things that we will have in LV stats 2 very soon is that we will also post the URL that is being hit. So you will see 3 sources of information. You will see URLs that are being hit. You will see processes that are running, and you will see the queries that are being executed. So you will have a lot of information. Now, regarding which PHP file is being executed, remember that quite often today it really not gonna help you, because for example with WordPress and majority of other CMS, it's index PHP. It's always index PHP, so it doesn't give you much anyway. But we try to give you as much information as possible, so it would be easier to figure it out. Well, so the question was rephrased, the previous question, how many websites is the industry sweet spot and how for 8-core server, and the same for CloudLinux. So the numbers I gave you were for CloudLinux. We really don't know what the numbers are for the industry as a whole, but I would approximate that you're at least 25% lower on non-CloudLinux servers, simply to keep the servers as stable. Now, I have to say that it really depends, because when we speak about industry as a whole, there is a difference depending on regions that we have noticed. So for example, in US and Western Europe, we have seen a lot of hosters putting stability as a number one priority, and they don't go with a large number of customers just because they know that the server can go down for hardware reasons, for whatever reason, and they want to limit their exposure. In other regions, we've seen the density being the main aspect, and we've seen servers with 8 cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM running 2,000 websites. And even with CloudLinux, they're like at 90% of utilization. The idle CPU is at zero half of the time. It still works. It's still fine. It's slow. Sometimes it's very slow. But again, I guess it's a nature of how much you charge for the hosting and how much you expect it to get and competition you're facing in that particular market. But my guess, and it's a guess, we should be at least 10-25% higher in density. Will DirectAdmin LVE Manager plugin support new LVE Manager will be done in AngularJS. It will be single manager for all Plesk, cPanel, DirectAdmin, and we will have translations that cover all of them. So it will be much easier to translate. It will work for all of them, etc., etc., etc. The limits could work as a network switch and not how a hub. Think of a concept of the best effort. In the time only one customer running in the server, they should have all the power. Two users have power, and so on. Yeah, of course you can do it. I mean, it's simple to automate stuff like that. Just when you add new user, recount the limits, reset the limits, and that's it. Do requests that end up with 404 or 403 responses count as entry process or not? Typically not. Is there overhead installing enabling LVE? How much? So the way we install by default, LVE works only on dynamic requests like CGI and PHP. And the overhead is less than 1%. So it's actually less than 0.1% because that was precision of our tools that were measuring it, and we couldn't detect any difference. With static files, when used with Apache, the overhead was 10%. And that's why we're not using it with static files. People who want to do use it with static files, and for example, it's something that a lot of people use when serving video files or huge files, because there you want to limit the I/O, you might want to limit the how many files they can simultaneously use, and you can specify which MIME type should be handled by LVE, which are not. Do you own a hosting company too? No, we don't own any hosting company at all, and we're not affiliated with any hosting company. 60% utilization. How do you measure this in CloudLinux? So if you run top command, you should see CPU usage and you should see idle. So if your idle is less than 40% most of the time, it means your CPU utilization is more than 60% most of the time. And you can use commands such as, I believe it's SAR, SAR, that gives you the same statistics but over a period of time. Is there any API scripts to increase the LV limits automatically when it reaches the limit? No, but why would you do that? I mean, that's kind of like, if we automatically increase the limit when it's being hit, it's the same as you have no limit at all. But what we do have explanation in our blogs, how you can use statistical tools and triggers to decide when to increase limits, and then how to run it, how to tie it into a shell script to increase the limits. And in LV stats too, it will be even easier to do as a script. But I mean, think about it. If you just increase the limit anytime it's being hit, you have no limits at all. Is there any problem if we scale the speed of on hosting plans increase less than 100% of speed of each I presume core, for example 150 to 150? Will CPU scheduling work fine? Yes, in those cases, CPU scheduling will work just fine. I mean, remember, sometimes you have two processes running for the user at the same time, and you still have one core limit. So they have to share this time, or you can have five of them running. So what it will give them, it will give them a little bit more time to run. It will give them a bigger time slot. Even half a core is still fine as long as you understand that when you compare the speed with CloudLinux and have a core and without CloudLinux, your requests are twice as slow, simply because you're given half of the time. So if you give 150% of the time and you still test one process, the speed will be the same. But if you run two processes at the same time without CloudLinux, it will use both CPUs, and with CloudLinux, one of the processes will be throttled, which is, to be honest, completely fine for shared hosting. Shared hosting is not meant for people who have 2, 3, 4 PHP processes constantly running all the time. If they do need that, upgrade them to the plans that have 200, 300, 400 speed, not 150 speed. And that's where it all plays. I actually had too low CPU limit problem running on a pure SSD server. The CPU LVE limits was around 150% and the load on the server was 10-15. After raising all CPU limits to 250, 300%, the load went down to 4-5%. Okay, so this is actually a very interesting case, and I will spend another 2 minutes on that. Hopefully I still have time. So why did that happen? There is a number of reasons. You might be into high performance hosting. Your customers have heavy websites and they constantly have maybe 20, 30 concurrent users on their sites, which might translate into 3, 4, 5 simultaneous customers on simultaneous PHP processes being hit all the time. If that's the case, yes, just increasing those limits to those numbers will solve the problem and you're good. The question is, are you charging correctly? I hope you are. Good for you. Great. If you are not charging correctly, do you want those customers? You might be able to just figure out who are those customers who are hitting the servers that hard. There might be just 10, 15 those customers out of 200. You might charge them more, like tell them, look, we have 200 customers on the servers, but 3 of you, or you particularly, are constantly needing 3 cores, and you're paying only $10 for that. That's not proper. Like the proper price for that is 3-core VPS, which would cost about $50, and you can move them off, or use the same server and set those limits just for those customers and generate extra money by charging them more, putting more customers on the same server, etc., etc. So this is the case where you have just a few customers. If all of your customers are like that, fine, you did the right thing, everything is great. The third case is something with your settings. So for example, no, actually scratch it. I don't see anything that with the settings that would cause something like that. I wanted to say that if you have, for example, PHP FPM set to have 10 PHPs in the pool, that might cause it, but no, it will not, because they would be sleeping, they would not be using CPU, so that would be fine. But honestly, look at the opportunity. There might be opportunity. You might have just a handful of customers who need more cores, more CPU. You might upgrade just them, charge them more. And it's an opportunity, not just a problem. For auto virtual memory faults, what does this represent and means? So when Linux process allocates memory, it requests the memory from the file system, but from the Linux operating system, but memory is not really allocated. And as a result, it's called virtual memory. You don't have this memory yet. And another thing is, when you launch another process, even though if there is another process, like if it's a fork of another process, they share some memory. So what often happens is that you're using virtual memory is actually much higher number than actual physical memory, that RAM that you have on a server that is being used by that user. And in CloudLinux 5, we had no other way to limit. And it was still useful because it limited the amount of memory people could allocate, and as a result, limited amount of memory that people could use. But it's a faulty limit. You should disable it. It means that process will no longer be able to allocate memory. Okay. Any WHMCS integration to upsell LVE packages? Yes, we're working on that, but I don't believe. Actually, if you simply put it as a package, meaning that package 1 has one limit, package 2 has another limit, and then customer upgrades to it using WHMCS, it would perfectly work, and their LVE limits would upgrade as well. Okay, did you take into consideration my SQL governor in the default limits? Originally, no, we didn't. But I have to say that by the time MySQL governor started to be counted into original default limits, what happened was that servers became much beefier, and what was one core before became more than what was one core 5 years ago. So the default limits are still fine. You can use 1.5 cores, it's fine, but it's not important. And another thing to consider is that why it's not really important with these two processes. So now we have PHP process and MySQL process running. Aren't they sharing CPU? Aren't there more context switches? In reality, no, because what happens is that you have PHP creating a SQL query. Once it runs a SQL query, it actually stops running. It gets blocked and it's not running anymore. After that, MySQL thread is running, processes this query, gets the results, then it sends these results back to PHP, and at that point, it stops running. So you are still having this one core handling in sequence PHP MySQL because they're simply unable to handle it in parallel anyway. Occasionally, we see site hit AP limit over and over. Is this likely a DOS attack or maybe something else? Well, if you see very high number of EPs, yes, it's a DOS attack. If it's a very low, it means they're hitting this limit and you might just increase it. If you see they're also using a lot of CPU or IO, see if you can upgrade them to a higher plan by explaining to them, okay, you're hitting that limit, you're using a lot of CPU, you're using a lot of that. If sometimes they simply have spikes, it depends. So for example, they might have run the advertisement and a lot of people went to their website at one particular time. That caused this problem. Once again, you can deal with the customer different ways. You can ask them for more and increase only EP limit. You can simply increase the EP limit and that's it. There is a lot of things to do. But what's important to remember, when you increase EP limit, look at CPU and IO usage first. Based on our experience with CloudLinux, it was not possible to trace which exact PHP script causing resource usage. Yeah, if a customer is having broken WordPress plugin or anything that runs PHP that results in the domain resources being limited, how would we narrow down which PHP script is causing the issue? Is it time consuming to disable plugins one by one to identify the problem? LVE top only shows excessive multiple PHP processes under the user. Yeah, this is a problem we're trying to solve with LVE stats 2 and snapshots. They're in beta now. Right now they show which processes and which queries. Next release will also show which URLs, which we hope will give you enough information. But once again, with WordPress, you still don't know what's being run because it's always index PHP. Like anytime you do anything, it's always index PHP that's being run. We assign the CPU on percentage instead of CPU speed. If we can't assign percentage with decimal, we assign 5% is 100%, 7%, etc. Is there any problem with the speed values or CPU scheduling will work wrong as we're setting CPUs in multiples of 100? So either way you're setting it, it's all being translated into speed anyway under the background, and it doesn't have to be multiple of 100. So it was clearly explained it badly, but let me just double confirm that there is no problem to have CPU not being multiple of 100. The issue is providing only a fraction of one CPU. If you provide only a fraction of one CPU, like 1/10, 1/4, 1/5 CPU, small fraction, you have a problem that each request takes 5-10 times longer. And that's a side effect of CPU scheduling. And it's basically a proper working of CPU scheduling. That's how it should work. It's just the nature of the beast. But there is absolutely no problem setting CPU speed to 102% or 150%, etc. It will just change the time slot, but the time slot will still be big enough and optimized enough for the server. Sometimes LVE stats causes server load mainly due to the size of DB logs. Is there any way to auto-plugin purging such logs? So the data is purged automatically every 2 months. With LVE stats, we're purging it every month, but consider to switching to something like Central MySQL or Postgres database for LVE stats. It might give you better results overall. Okay, why KGFS skeleton takes much space? Well, it's basically a safe copy of a system. Only safe files are there, but all of the safe files are there. That's why it can easily take 10 gigabytes. Hi, about KGFS integration. Can an account direct migrate from CloudLinux cPanel to non-CloudLinux cPanel server? Any precautions needed to look into? Well, so if you migrate from KGFS into no KGFS, the only thing you should care about is PHP selector integration, because basically PHP selector will not work without KGFS. With CloudLinux to non-CloudLinux server, the only issues are PHP selector, Ruby selector, and Python selector. So extra features that CloudLinux give. Everything else is the same. Of course, moving from non-cPanel to non-CloudLinux to CloudLinux is completely non-issue, and we have no problems with that at all, as we support pretty much, everything that cPanel supports. Did you say jail shell should not be used when LVE limits? If so, why? Well, let me rephrase. If you use KGFS, you should not use jail shell, because KGFS has better jail shell than jail shell. To be honest, it's simply ignored. Jail shell is completely ignored when you use KGFS. If you don't use KGFS, then jail shell is fine. But I would strongly recommend KGFS because it's much better than jail shell from the security and usability perspective. And proc for user counts DB governor for particular user? No. So for database governor, we only count CPU and IO. We don't count entry processes. We don't count memory. We don't count number of processes. Recently, we were facing many issues with systemd services in CentOS 7. Server load were high and generating more zombie processes when tried to update LVE value in KGFS. Do you think systemd or CentOS is stable for hosting? Mainly because sometimes systemd processes act as horrible. Well, if you want my opinion, systemd should die. If you want my view of the future, it will not die. It's here to stay. And yes, I would wait. What surprises me a lot that CentOS 7 and systemd is pumping out new features which are crazy, that gonna break production servers. Like new systemd will have a feature that will kill background processes. Like it would simply, like if it's a user account and it's running background processes, it would kill it. That makes no sense for me because since 90s I was using no hub to run background processes that way when I need it. But what can I say? So no, I think systemd is not ready, but Red Hat thinks it is. We have 6 more questions. How many websites for a 24 core server and 64 gigabyte RAM? Your mileage will vary on the how heavy websites are. I've seen people running 1,000 websites on such server. I've seen people running 5,000 websites on such server. And you can easily run 20 websites with 4 core each sold as a VPS at $50 each or something like that on that server as well. So it really depends. Is there any LV control best on reseller account? So right now it uses default limits. we really don't have two-level limits yet. We plan to do them. Once we do them, we will let resellers decide, and their limits will be within the limits that the hoster will provide, so it's still an issue. Okay, for a reseller, is it possible to set a collective memory limit for all accounts under the same reseller? No, not yet. Honestly speaking, we don't know if we will be able to do. Yeah, I think we will be. So we are targeting CPU and memory limits first, I believe, for two-level limits, and at some point we will be able to do it, but just not yet. Is there a way to automatically inform an account owner that limits are reached, or notify us about accounts that reach limits? Yes and yes. There is a blog post about it, how to get notifications on such cases, how to do upsell. If you cannot find it, contact our support and they'll send you the link. We had pretty good description on that. Actually, I think you can even set it from LVE Manager in cPanel. There is a notification tab where you can just click few checkboxes and radio buttons, and you'll get emails. Customers will get emails, and you can modify those emails and all of that. Okay, last question. Just want to make sure I understand that the CPU settings correctly. If speed equals XX% would set performance level relative to one core, then setting speed 50% on a two-core server would equal one full core. No, it would be equal to half of a single core. So with the speed, these percentages are relative to a single core. 50% is half a core, 100% is a whole core, 200% is two cores, 150% is 1.5 cores. I think that's the last question. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for coming. Bye bye, everyone.